if you're finding yourself, but I'll phrase it delicately, like not really buying into the whole thing about climate fiction, it may not be for you in the sense that, like this book deals with conversations around climate change and what I call the poly crisis, which is environmental disaster, things like fires, flooding, tornadoes, earthquakes, that kind of stuff. But also at the same time, misinformation, deep fakes, people that are learning to adapt in a post-pandemic kind of environment. So that was me. That was the starting point, is the adaptation, realizing that the pandemic, I basically had shut down my businesses before the pandemic started, but there was always that little string of hope.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a great author on the podcast, back from a trip out west, and he's back in home, and he's taking some time for us, which I really appreciate that. Bill's here with us. Bill is an author, and he also has an AI side to what he does and what he knows, and I'm curious about that. Got lots to talk about with Bill. Bill, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here, privileged to be with you, and looking forward to a conversation.
It's amazing. Okay, for those listening at home or busy wherever they are, tell everybody where you are in this big world of ours.
I'm in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and just in case. And we've been living here, my wife and son, for about 6 years. We moved from London, Ontario, and prior to that, a little bit of a nomad, working backwards, Toronto and parts of BC, and I grew up in Ottawa, which was, I'll kind of consider that my hometown, but Kingston's catching up pretty quick.
There you go. Home of the Frontenacs, right?
Yeah.
The Frontenac, and also
Tragically Hip, Sarah Harmer, lots of other great bands, right. Weeping Dial, the Gertrudes. Yeah, the music scene is very great here.
So all the good people live in Kingston or have moved to Kingston.
Well, I don't want to offend anybody who's not here, but so I kind of discovered it too late almost. But now that we're established, everybody come to Kingston. It's a fantastic city. It's one of those cities you can get from end to end within about 10 minutes. Toronto, you're pretty much out of the parking lot. So it's pretty great.
So we'll be sure to put your home address in the show notes. Everybody can just stop by for a coffee or
for sure,
a visit, right? That's fine. You're okay with that. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, all right, we'll do that. Yeah. All right, we'll make sure we put that in there. Bill, this is amazing. So tell us a little bit about your author journey. When did all this start for you? What was the thing that made you go, you know what? Hey, I got 5-10 minutes of my day. I'm going to become an author.
Yeah, great question. I mean, writing has always been in me. There's always been the writing muse kind of waiting to be tapped. But recently, I have a love-hate with the pandemic, as most people probably do. Forced myself to do a lot of navel gazing and self-discovery at the same time. I really zeroed in on writing. There was this moment when I had gone back to school, to college, to study a program called Music and Digital Media, which doesn't scream writing. But at the same time, I had really been reinforcing my adaptation to artificial intelligence. And when I saw a couple of the students using some of the tools to generate images and generate some text, I was like, that was the light bulb moment when they we're talking like a year ago, really crude images being done or developed by something like DALL-E or ChatGPT or Midjourney. Now they're so elaborate and they're so intricate. But about a year and a half ago, seeing these images being generated just out of text prompts was like that real light bulb moment. So I explored some of the ideas related to this. I made it the book that I wrote, Extinction Event, became semi-autobiographical as a launching point. This middle-aged guy goes back to school to kind of, kick around and discover the foibles of being in amongst the hallways with 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds, that kind of thing. And in the process, he really discovers this glitch that is associated with analog versus digital recordings. Now, I'm jumping into the story, but hopefully that's tackled your question. It was really that key light bulb moment and seeing the potential of using some of these tools, and I'm still very careful to describe them as tools, for advancing your talent base. The synopsis is that I describe myself as, to kind of twist that old adage of jack of all trades, I'm a jack of all trades and mediocre at everything. And it turns out that I just use AI to just bump up that bar a little bit.
There's another unique use purpose that you have for AI, all around AI voicing and using all of that. I've tinkered with that a little bit in my podcasting journey.
Yeah.
But you went to a totally different place with it that I'm so curious about. And I don't think many people have considered the way you use AI, and particularly for voicing things that you work on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I have a history. You can hear it just a little bit right now, and I might dive into. I've got my water bottle handy. I have a little bit of a physical disability, very minor with my vocal cords. So I'm in the process of seeing a speech language pathologist, doing registered massage therapy, that kind of stuff to kind of try and loosen things up. But it's been a very long process, and I even thought at one point that one of my vocal cords was paralyzed. So I had been overcompensating, one had atrophied, but after a couple of second opinions, it's ultimately just comes down to better breathing exercises and self-care, that kind of stuff. So I'm at 55, 56 years old. I'm finally learning how to take care of myself and use my voice better, but it does eventually collapse after a certain point. And so there's only so long that I can speak without it starting to really tighten up. And of course, this poses a problem with one of the great ways to monetize a new book is to convert it to an audiobook. And going through that process, and of course, there's that steep learning curve that I've picked up with all of the things with self-publishing, whether it's promoting or publishing or getting into audiobooks. It is the narration. And the narration, we're talking about 10 hours of straight narration. And I wouldn't be able to handle it. So I went to a platform, and I hope you don't mind the shameless plug here I have no benefit, but I really got enamored with it. It's called 11labs.io, I think is their URL. And it was incredible. Yeah. It was, so I signed up for the all-you-can-eat package. I've got an 85,000 word book, or about a 700,000 character book. So that was more than about 2 months worth of translation from text to narration. And the narration is excellent. It still has that tone of HAL from Space 2001. If everybody, those who don't know it can look it up, but it's just that very monotone, robotic voice without the some of those empathetic tones or the switches, rage or frustration or calm. But what it does have is a very straight, consistent narration. And I'm in the process of converting all of those tracks to MP3 for upload to different podcast platforms like Spotify, but also implement paywall for myself so that people can listen to a full audiobook version. So yeah, it was a really cool discovery process. And ultimately, the rationale that I use, and if people are thrown off by it, they're welcome to ask me, but one of the key characters in the book is an artificial intelligence platform that another character develops. So having a voice of an artificial intelligence narrate the story really, that doesn't quite give a spoiler here, but it does give you a sense that we are headed in that direction, whether we like it or not. And the title hopefully says a little bit more about the direction. And I don't have to worry too much about spoilers. An event will happen where something else will become almost extinct.
Wow. So one thing I noticed on ChatGPT is the most recent release where you can actually talk to ChatGPT and it talks back to you and it sounds like a real person. Like it's like you can actually have a conversation with this thing and you're not sitting here trying to type in prompts and trying to figure out how to make it do what you want. And it doesn't do it. You got to do it again. And it's just getting better and better and better. And I think that AI is probably the dumbest it'll ever be right now.
Yeah.
It's only going to get smarter and more user-friendly. We talked about perplexity.ai as an option as well. That's one thing I've been playing with. Any fear in your mind around AI, or are you just all in? You just loving this?
Yeah, I'm very yin-yang about the whole thing. As somebody who I still create from my own heart, from my own instincts. I still write. I still do music composition. I still do poetry. And I still really enjoy the idea of being inspired by the muses. And it sounds mildly spiritual, but that spark comes from somewhere. And when I'm just kind of trudging through my daily life, and when I'm hit by something, I'm always amused and I'm always entertained by the idea that it's just coming from somewhere, like a lightning bolt inspiration that hits you. And I always feel like I've got to write it down like instantly. I got to capture that instantly. So I've always got like little notes or lyrics, or I have a voice recorder where I just hum in a couple of bars of something. That's me as a creator. The creator universe is the analogy I use for artificial intelligence. The tools that are being used is that we have a small handful of technocrats that are really just going around the internet universe with a giant trawler, a giant ocean trawler, scraping everything indiscriminately and claiming it's theirs. But at the same time, not claiming it's theirs, just charging you for access to that information. So somebody has moved into your basement and now is charging you to live in your basement or your studio. And now you're like, what's going on? So this is where we have to pause for thought and ask ourselves, is this a sustainable business model where eventually you're going to have so much taken out of the system and regurgitated in ways that you're not really familiar? So to continue that analogy, you have the ocean trawler. What we used to have is octopi and fish and squid and whales. Now we have sushi. So we're in the situation. It comes to us in a plate. We've paid for it, and it's like, well, this is not the salmon or the octopus that that was living happily roaming around the ocean. Now it's just something on my plate that I consume, and it's a reflection of our society as a whole. And where it goes, it's an unstoppable trade now.
Yeah. And I think that brings us back as authors and creators, that our unique voice will help us stand out in a sea of maybe in some cases vanilla content where everything is kind of homogenized and kind of similar and nothing stands out with that true personal story. And so far AI hasn't been broken up with, hasn't lost someone, hasn't really been fired, hasn't walked out to their car with a box full of stuff from their desk. Yeah. They haven't lived those kinds of emotions. They can kind of probably do a copy of that, but they don't really have that same passion and lived experience that humans have. So we have that as still our advantage. So we can still lean into that as authors, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I think we're also, I mean, doing the research for the book, the real light went on for me when I saw some of the people. There's people like the Earth Species Project or interspecies.io. They're run and funded by the same technocrats, like Asa Raskin, who's intimately associated with the Earth Species Project. They're using artificial language and large language models to try to break that Rosetta Stone that exists. I truly believe it does exist between us and other species of animals. For example, the SETI Institute, the Cetacean Institute that studies whale interactions, they have just recently used AI to identify a whale language. And so now we have, I would argue we probably, because humans only hear a certain frequency of sound, the whale frequency may be like this. Yeah. Ours is like this. So when we teach ourselves how to listen to this, and I can see myself out of frame there, just for exaggeration purposes, but when we learn how to go into those higher frequencies and understand what's being communicated, then we'll hear, like right now with the animal language, we might be hearing G through K for alphabet. And we're trying to create a language using G through K. Well, imagine when we've got A through Z or more, right? And this is where AI is really potentially just so incredibly powerful in terms of us learning our place on the earth. Because once we crack that code, we're going to have a lot of animals talking back to us. And I kind of anticipated what they're going to have to say.
I'm sure they have a lot to say. It's been stored up for many, many years, right? I'm afraid of what my dog's going to say, because my dogs know all my secrets. And every time they wink at me, I always wink back, because I never know if they're ever going to give away my secrets, right? So we have an agreement, right? So
that's right. That's why they say it's your best friend, right? You know, and you have to treat your dog like your best friend.
Yeah.
But ours, unfortunately, sadly, ours just, her secrets will be taken to the grave. We just lost our fortune. And when you have a relationship, like just like basically an empathetic human-like relationship, not an intimate one, of course, but you know, when they are your friend and you lose them, it becomes so shattering, right? So why you have your friend, and they're not here for a long time, but they're here for a good time.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Okay, so I would love to talk more about the book too, Bill, and I would love for people that are listening to know like who this book is for, who's your target audience, because someone listening to this be like, oh, I want a copy, but I know of 5 other people who need a copy of this book, so I'm buying multiples. And that's what we want to do, right? We want to sell some books. So I would love to identify that audience for the listeners so they know who this is who would be the target for this.
Very short. The genre is a relatively new genre called climate fiction. If you are, if you're finding yourself, I'll phrase it delicately, like not really buying into the whole thing about climate fiction, it may not be for you in the sense that, you know, like this book deals with conversations around climate change and what I call the polycrisis, which is environmental disaster, things like fires, flooding, tornadoes, earthquakes, that kind of stuff. But also at the same time, misinformation, deep fakes, people that are learning to adapt in a post-pandemic kind of environment. So that was me. That was the starting point, is the adaptation, realizing that the pandemic, I basically had shut down my businesses before the pandemic started, but there was always that little string of hope, that, well, maybe if something came up or someone came along and said, let's kick the can further down the field, then I might have reinvigorated those, but at that point, the pandemic just kind of shut it all down. I'm like, okay, yeah, now I got to reinvent myself and go from there. So, the book, so climate fiction is a key thing. Music fans, there's a lot of Easter eggs about music in there. Then, of course, there's, for me, I did a lot of mythological studies. One of my other books, it's just a collection of poetry that I did related to song lyrics, all based on the Joseph Campbell hero's journey. So the hero's journey kicks in. I followed that. I hate calling it a template, but it's pretty tried and true to really work with character development and using archetypes and different reliable themes that you just add your own salt and pepper to. So those are the broad strokes. The details of the book, I won't give too many details, but generally it follows a guy who's he's gone back to school. So there's some familiarity there. He develops a relationship, just a friendship, with the recording instructor. They work their way through and identify these glitches in analog versus digital sound. And the glitches may sound big, but they're very, very micro. Like if you look at a WAV file, they'll be very, very minor. But he picked up on these differences. And then he discovered through a chain of events that they're related to a long-lost love, Sylvie Hunter, who is also the programmer of this platform called GAIA. And GAIA is an artificial intelligence platform being used by, a very, very established elite group of people that are kind of this unknown seven kind of thing. So I had to integrate this, group of villains that they use her platform to create deep fakes and misinformation, but she is using them for the power that they have access to. And so it starts out as kind of a win-win kind of relationship, but she gets the upper hand, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. There are some murder mystery bits happening as well. So I kind of get all in.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's a nice combination. That's amazing. Who is one of or some of your inspirations as authors? Is there somebody that you follow that you're really captivated by their writing?
Yeah. Well, a combination of historical nonfiction, if you will. I mentioned Joseph Campbell. He comes for me with, he is very much a muse in terms of his stylings, both in terms of intense level of research. So if you wanted to research some stuff about AI, I've got about 400 pages of it because I wanted to make sure that I had solid background. But in reference to the fictional lore that Joseph Campbell reiterates in a lot of his work, is starting with the hero's journey, but also a lot of the stuff like the Hero with 1,000 Faces and all of his other works like Creative or Primitive Mythology, that kind of thing. By extension, the Pacifica, which is where Joseph Campbell Library is, and there's a lot of people associated with that. And one of the authors that has contributed to a lot of the discussions there is Chris Bogler. Christopher Bogler has basically, it started with this literally this mythological 7-page memo that he wrote for, I think it was for Disney, that said, here are the steps that you should follow when you're writing a book. And it's really basically like an ingredient list and a recipe list that you may not buy into the idea of, and I'm trying not to call it a template, but again, you use the archetypes and those memes that people are very familiar with, and then you just add your own flavor to it. So this is the nonfiction. Fiction, wow. I was recently really rocked by a female writer, Madeline Miller, wrote a book called Kirke or Circe, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And it's a story that is a readaptation of the Iliad, basically. So it's the story of Odysseus as he travels back to his homeland. But it centers around this, they call her a witch, but she's really just kind of a goddess who she becomes a very important figure, starting with Prometheus. And then Daedalus, who was one of the great creators and inventors in mythological eras. And then Odysseus and her relationship with him. And you learn through that book from a different, very perspective. Some heroes, it's like what they say, you don't want to meet your heroes. And everybody always loves to, really dive into the story of the Odyssey. And of course, it is such a fundamental foundation for so much of what we know in terms of epic storytelling. But there are some cracks in the armor. There are some human characteristics that really get, blown out of proportion in this book that really, create a nice turn on things. Pause for a drink. Other favorites for me are people like Neil Gaiman. The immensely creative Neil Gaiman. I just, anytime he comes to, every once in a while, it's kind of my go-to. I'm in a bookstore or something. It's like, please tell me there's something new from Neil Gaiman. And it makes my day. But I also get into a lot of just in the world of the internet where people, just anybody out of the blue commenting on rock lyrics and trying to understand how they interpret or see those lyrics, and they get weirdly personal, right? And people, there might be a song that's about like a love song, but then somebody writes that it's about addiction or something, and you're like, I don't know where that came from, but I'm seeing this song in a very different light, So there's that as kind of this constant resource, but. And then, of course, by extension, music is something that's always part of my life. Like, there's always something going on in terms of music. So bands from right up through 60s, like the Beatles and all the obvious, like who's your favorite band, to U2 and Bruce Springsteen, up through newer bands like The National or Wilco, or some of these other great independent. I tend to lean independent. I tend to be an underdog kind of, favor guy. Obviously, U2 and Bruce Springsteen are no longer underdogs, but they were at one point.
They're doing okay. Yeah. Right. That's I love that, and I love the musical connections. That's my background as well. So that's a great tie into everything that you're doing. So for you as an author, you have the book out in the world, and it's great that you have that. My podcast is called Living the Next Chapter. So it's kind of built into my questioning that I always like to ask all the authors that come on, what you're doing to live that next chapter when, promoting the book. Obviously, that's super important. But is there something that's kind of down the road for you that's caught your eye or you're curious about that you might be pursuing?
Too much. I'm like a fly at a picnic sometimes, like this is actually why I really admire you, because when we first spoke, you're like, well, I've got 8, maybe 9 podcasts going, the kind of thing. And I'm like, but you've got a lid on all of them, which is great.
Yeah.
And really, that's ultimately the way I describe myself. Sometimes is the fly at a picnic, like it's like, well, what's that? What's that? They can. So to answer your question, I have a prequel and a sequel kind of in the works. And I want to create them as is like kind of an umbrella or bridge, where Extinction Event sits in between, so that people will be reading this and then say, well, here's the connection later, and really try to knit that together in kind of a past, present, future type of thing. Again, it has mythological context with those 3 things because, well, I can dive into that later, but they're knitting things together in terms of time, past, present, future are always very important. So that's how I see these 3 books. So one is just looking at everything that was the build up to the group of villains, which I call the Plutonian Council, and their backstory. And then also the other characters and where they came from, and really paying an homage to where I came from in terms of really my love of music, which is kind of that mid to late 80s, what they call the new romantics music. So like stuff like the Smiths, the Cure, all of those really trashy, hair bands, bands, so now obviously I don't have that claim to fame, but, and the main character in Extinction Event, he starts his adult life basically working as a DJ, in British clubs. And this is kind of where things, literally start spinning from there, to pardon the pun. The sequel really tries to address a lot of the questions that I'm really hoping fans will have, like, always at the tip of their tongue, like, well, what happened to this person, or why did this happen, or was it this AI, or was it this person, or those kind of things, because I left enough subtlety in the depiction of events that a lot of the questions should be answered in the follow-up. And if that's not enough, I've got another book that I'm working on that is really just kind of a refresh of a book that I published, not published, and I'd be very careful about that because I wrote it in 2006, 2007, and had it finished. And a lot of the predictions that I made in that book kind of came true with the financial crisis in 2008. so not like I shouldn't pat myself back too much. It's not like it was my fault or something, because I have neither the money or the manipulative power. So, but there was it just kind of like, it was like, wow, that was weird. But the real excuse is that self-publishing tools really just didn't exist 15 years ago or 16 years ago. So it was always just on the back burner. It always just kind of sat there. But it is kind of like if I were to compare it to the Star Wars universe, it'd be kind of like, like Solo being slipped in between the sequential Star Wars movies.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good. Yeah, because I always like to know what's coming down the road for, I guess. The selfish reason is I always like inviting authors back as they work on new projects so we can get an update. As the listeners kind of fall in love with you and they got your book, and then they hear that you're back again, just like you said, going into the bookstore and going, oh, my favorite author, is there something new? We love hearing from our authors that come back. So keep that in mind, because I'd love to have you come back in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. And just the last footnote is related to everything that I did during the pandemic. What got me into the music program was that I was recording a number of my own songs, wrote my own lyrics, and going back to that analogy, I did it all in a very mediocre way. So I went to school, I learned how to record, and I've got some contacts who might be able to help me out a little bit more. And I am still hoping to release at least one album worth of songs. I doubt that I'll be using AI for the vocals. I could, but I would still like to have. I have a preference for humans in that respect, and so I'm always going to be kind of on the prowl for like somebody who's kind of into the same vibe, wants to do the vocals, and then I can just do all the background stuff. And then once that's out, I hope to have even I've got probably another 15, 16 songs ready to go as well. So I don't stop writing. That's the, kind of a good and bad thing.
Awesome. So if you're a singer, hey, stay in in his world. He might be giving you a call. He might be looking for some help with this. So that's great. I love it. Bill, so as far as connecting with you and following your journey as an author, where do you want to send us? Where are you most active? Where's your website? All that great information.
Website is billwittur.com, BILLWITTUR.com. And it's a bit of a work in progress right now. So probably the bigger shout out is if you really got a handle on WordPress themes and you want to help out with a website, there is a contact page that works. So yeah, I would love to hear. But that's the best way to kind of follow updates. And of course, you can look up my name on Amazon. I think I actually chose the birth certificate name, which was I'm in trouble name, William J. Wittur. And that's on Amazon, a number of other platforms for the EPUB version, like iTunes and Kobo, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So we can definitely grab a copy. And then any timeline on the audio book?
I'm hoping within the next month. It depends on how quickly I can get a paywall set up for access to the audiobook, because I prefer not to give it all away for free. It would be nice to monetize that, but eventually it will be up on both YouTube and Spotify as starting points.
One of the things I'm using for my podcast is through Buy Me a Coffee. And they have a store feature now on Buy Me a Coffee where people can actually buy things from you and download, whether it's a PDF or all that other things. Might be a consideration for you as a paywall option. It's very, very user-friendly for your audience to purchase things from you. So there's a consideration for you if you want to use that.
Great idea. Great suggestion. Yeah. Yeah. I was looking into Patreon, which is basically your Patreon. It's essentially the same thing, but I'll look into that.
Yeah. So it's a nice way for people to do like a single purchase if you wanted to buy one thing. Right? Yeah. So it's good. Awesome. Well, we'll keep following the journey, Bill. I'd love to have you back again, as we discussed, and get an update from you as you pursue your journey as an author. Yeah. Great thoughts around AI. I think a lot of us who might be a little nervous around AI, there's some great things there. Yeah. So put your toe in the water. You're gonna learn a lot, and there's new things coming out. As we've had this podcast episode, there's been 10 new AI platforms that have been created. Yeah. So it's just going to keep coming. There's going to be more and more, and it's going to help you in your journey as a content creator. So take a look. You might learn a few things, and it might help you in your journey.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm always available. One of the things I'm trying to provoke here on a local level is an AI conference where we look at all of those things. So if anybody ever wants to have me come and chat, then it would be a pleasure, privilege, etc.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it was great chatting with you, Dave. You've got a wonderful world, and I really appreciate all the hard work that you do to bring a little bit of light into people's day, and just shed a little bit of light on what people are doing. It's really fantastic.
It's amazing having a podcast. I get to meet some of the best people in the world. Yeah. And Bill, thank you for joining the club. It's glad to have you here.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Awesome. All the information, everyone, as always, is in the show notes. Please go support Bill when you buy the book, because I know you're going to buy the book. You're going to leave a great review for Bill as well, so that everyone knows how amazing that book is. So please leave a 5-star review, but also some great detail around why that book is so great. Please do that and support Bill in his journey. Thank you, Bill, for doing this.
Thanks so much, Dave. Pleasure talking to you with you.
Hey, thanks for listening all the way to the end of the podcast. That's a big signal to all of the players, the YouTubes, the Apples, the Spotifys, that you found value in this episode of Living the Next Chapter. Just by you listening to the end, you just sent a huge bat signal out to the app saying this was a great podcast, a great conversation. So you listening to this point, you've done your job. I have one more ask of you. If you know anyone that would benefit from this conversation, would you share this episode with them? Would you just get on, send them a message, send them the episode, tell them about this episode, tell them to go livinginthenextchapter.com to get all the information about the podcast. Can you do that for me? Because the more people that hear this message, this episode, the better. I want to support these amazing authors, and I know you do as well. So sharing this episode really helps, and I appreciate you. See you on the next episode, and thank you for listening to Living the Next Chapter.